welcome to the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes and Thomas Dimitroff going live with some big breaking news today, Thomas. I love breaking news. This isn't the kind of breaking news that is particularly enjoyable, talking about somebody losing their job, but it is definitely gives us a lot to chew on this Tuesday, October 8th. Robert Saleh out in New York. We also are going to talk about Davante Adams, how this news maybe affects a potential trade to the New York Jets, but also landing spots for him, trade comp, all that kind of stuff. That was what we were intending to talk about today, because that feels like a very fluid situation. Also, reports saying that as of yesterday was going to happen within the next 48 hours. And so we'll get to that conversation. But obviously, Robert Saleh is the first head coach to be fired. 5 games into the season is pretty big.
BTW love live from LA and live from Atlanta. This is great. I'm excited about this. And I will tell you right now, it feels like I'm on the top of a mountain somewhere in Colorado with my board pointed straight down, getting ready to dig into some wild stuff, not only now, but as the season goes on. I think this is setting up to be a wild in-season moves, adjustments. Like, there is nothing like the fast-paced element of what's happening in the NFL these days. And when I'm outside of it now, meaning I'm no longer working in the organization, it's amazing to feel the nuance of all of this, right? You're excited about it, not because you feel bad of course you feel bad for people losing their jobs, as I do, but you're talking about things that are really, really important to the next part in development of this league. And I think it's wildly important.
Yeah, it reshapes the landscape in a number of different ways. You and I, obviously, the main focus of this show, I would say, kind of centers around roster building to a degree and team building. And this is a huge component to that. So we've got Robert Saleh out as head coach of the New York Jets. He's been there since 2021. He has a 2-3 record this year. It's the first time in his 25 years running the team that Woody Johnson has fired a coach midseason. So this is an abnormal set of circumstances. That's kind of saying a lot, honestly, because there have been, I forget who tweeted it earlier today. Somebody tweeted out a list of all of the Jets coaches that they've had since 2000. So a 24-year period since the turn of the century, and not a single one of them has a winning record. So the fact that this situation called for Woody Johnson to say, we're pulling the plug, and the way that he did it too, because it apparently caught a lot of people off guard there. According to Connor Hughes of SNY Thomas, the thought process was that he walked into the building this morning and wanted to meet with Robert Saleh, and that he ultimately didn't think that he could turn it around. There are other reports saying that he thinks that they have a very good roster and that they can win. So you've got like kind of dual components there. Connor is saying that there were people in the building who thought that Hackett was on thin ice this week. I think for obvious reasons, the offense has not been good. Nathaniel Hackett is the offensive coordinator. He's also kind of Aaron's guy, right? Like, he came because Aaron was a big fan of his from their time together in Green Bay. And it's worth noting also, I suppose, because the jump there mentioning Aaron, Jordan Schultz says that this was not Aaron, that their relationship is strong, Robert Saleh and Aaron Rodgers, that this was all Woody Johnson. This was an ownership call here.
I mean, I trust Jordan Schultz a lot. I think he's got a firm grasp of how things are working. I would say when this first happened, my thought went to, okay, where are we with the power of a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers? If Aaron Rodgers and Coach Saleh were at loggerheads, would that have played into the discussion? Hey, we're not operating well. Do we need to make a decision? Remember, make no mistake about this, the powerful quarterbacks that are out there, I'm not just talking about the minions, the lower levels, but the power ones definitely have discussions with ownership and general managers and presidents about their organization. They don't call the shots. Let's be very clear about that. But there's no question that they are searched and seeked out for advice on what would you do, or how are things truly going? What are our needs here? So I guess I was thinking that there was going to be more to that, possibly along the lines that I was going to say, what if Aaron Rodgers not only had a strong say in that, and evidently he doesn't, so that's good, but then also having a strong say in bringing in a guy like Davante Adams, which is another part of the conversation. You know, when things operate like that and things are changed like that, it has people checking out the entire situation to see the direction of how the organization is going to make decisions. So as a former general manager, we have an element of paranoia about us, right? We are looking at things with so many different lenses, and it's the smart way to do it, as long as the paranoia and the thought process doesn't overtake you as an organization. Joe Douglas is a very sound thinker there. And of course, Woody Johnson has been around this business a long time. They have a president there, Jaime Eli, who is top notch. They have people there that can make good decisions moving forward. And this is going to be really important as we watch and see what happens here with the Jets situation.
Would you be surprised if Woody Johnson had not sought out Aaron Rodgers to at least ask his opinion prior to doing this?
I would be surprised. Again, this is not something that I in any way am suggesting that Aaron Rodgers had to say in yay or nay. It is, where are we? And I'm not putting words in Woody Johnson's mouth. I am just, from a bigger picture, from how ownerships look at their train set, it's imperative that they think things out intelligently, and they don't just go on a whim or pissed off the night before or agitated because they were according to some former coaches out there, Eric Mangini, saying that it might have been because there were agitations of losing out in the UK, where Woody Johnson was very involved there in the political scene.
Yeah, I thought actually that was an interesting point, and that was repushed today because Eric Mangini said that last week prior to going to London. It was on his radar saying, I think that this week's really big for the Jets because I think, I'm being Eric Mangini now, that Woody Johnson will be particularly unhappy about losing in London if that's the way that it goes down, while he sits in a box with his, powerful friends in London from having served as the ambassador to the UK for a time period. And I do think that having talked to you on this show for the last few months, that struck me as a very Thomas Dimitroff related thought process, because a lot of the points that you make here are you're framing decisions within teams in ways that I think most of us on the outside don't think of them. We just look at them from a pure football standpoint. And you have said over and over again, you have to think about how ownership thinks and how ownership handles situations. And so in this case, as soon as I saw that Eric Mangini had said that, I thought, Thomas, like, we have to talk about this, because there feels like there might be some there.
Well, again, Eric Mangini is a very smart guy as well, and he's going to have an idea of how this is potentially perceived by an owner. Woody Johnson has not been quoted on this. I will only say, and again, never to speak for him. I do speak for the situations that I have been in. I remember back a few years ago when we were coming back from London. It is a big picture, big ticket moment for an owner to be there internationally. We know how important international games are. You go over there, and if you get embarrassed, even if it's only by a few points and your expectations are big, it does affect people. When Arthur Blank and company and all of us came back from a game in London, Mike Smith Mike was one of the best coaches we ever had in Atlanta, but it was a tough time for him. We came back after a big time loss in London. It's tough. You're coming across the lake, so to speak. You land and you're thinking, man, we had this long trip. You have a lot to think about, and you land, and all of a sudden, potentially the owners start reaching out maybe to some of their media contacts, and they're pumping them for answers. They're trying to navigate or circumnavigate the questions that are asked of them as an owner and as presidents and such, and possibly general managers. And you're trying to avoid, but you're also trying to be honest. And so things can come out. And I remember, Mr. Blank, he came back, obviously wasn't happy after that loss. And all of a sudden, things started circulating out in the media. That causes an issue back in the building, right? Think about that, Lindsay. This isn't just, it's okay, it'll settle down, everything's fine. It becomes a big, big issue and a big further distraction, and even more agitation within the building between not only the players and the coaches, management, and ownership. So there's a lot to this. So you step back and you think about an owner like Woody Johnson saying, I knew going in there, this was what I wanted to do, possibly. I mean, I'm speaking again out of turn here. And how did he really navigate that when the loss came about? Was it, I'm going to think about this on the way home and I'll have clarity? Or was it the next morning? Was it on Monday morning? I mean,
right.
Tuesday morning? What is it? Where is it?
Well, it's interesting, this whole London component, because Jeff Darlington did tweet out today that he is now uh, Robert Saleh, the third head coach in the last 10 years to be fired immediately following a London loss. And so it's interesting that you're painting a picture of a particularly angry owner after a London loss, and we have examples here of like that particular loss for whatever reason really hitting differently for some of these owners. Dennis Allen and Joe Philbin were the other two that had
Can
been
I also
fired.
say, Lindsay, I mean, this is funny, and I know it's quirky for some people, like, this isn't just football. You guys are talking about peripheral stuff. And remember, when you go out to London, you're bringing marketing, you're bringing everyone, you're bringing big time sponsors out there. They're out there for a week, not always, but sometimes. There's a lot going on out there, right? And so it's just it just sort of inflames what could be a no distractions, let's go out there and play and turn around and come back. Some
Yeah.
people aren't like that. And when you go out there and it's not like that, and there's more to it, there's more pomp and circumstance to it, it becomes funky coming back
I
home.
mean, Thomas, look, I've seen Ted Lasso. Okay. Like, I know how these owners can be. And I'm 100% putting myself in a Ted Lasso situation here, going,
We love Ted Lasso. Love it.
how would the ex-husband owner have handled a loss that was embarrassing? And he would have fired a coach. That's what I'm willing to take away from that situation.
But Keeley would have kicked him in the shins and walked away, right? So we have a lot going on there. Hopefully we figured this out. Again, where are you right now with that? When you start thinking about Aaron Rodgers and the talk that he had nothing to do with this, do you think a head coach is really related in some way to the quarterback, where the quarterback can speak to that head coach a lot more than even possibly the general manager or the president or whoever?
Look, I think that there's 100% a scenario where Woody Johnson doesn't need anyone else's opinion, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if he looks out at what's on the field and he doesn't like what he sees, then he can absolutely make that decision without checking with anybody. I see that scenario. And so if Rodgers were to come out and say, like, nobody talked to me, I think that that's plausible. I can also see a scenario where at some point, maybe not even Sunday night, Monday on the trip home, maybe not even now, maybe just he's been checking in with Aaron Rodgers and saying, like, hey, I'm gauging your temperature. Like, what do you think? Are we going in the right direction? Is this the guy? Like, kind of feeling him out. And if Aaron Rodgers is not demonstratively on board with Saleh, then that factors into what Woody Johnson kind of puts in the back of his mind, right? Like, he's kind of gathering evidence over a period of time. And it's not just this year. Robert Saleh has been there since 2021. The offense has been a disaster the entire time. Now, you could argue that they haven't really had a quarterback, and now they have Aaron Rodgers. I don't know that his play has been particularly like mind-blowing necessarily, but Robert Saleh is a defensive-minded head coach. The defense has been very, very good since he's been there. Since he's been there, they're first in points per drive allowed. They're first in EPA per play. They're third in success rate allowed. This year, they're second in yards per game allowed. They're tied for fifth in points per game allowed. The defense has not been the problem. But as a head coach, the defense is not his only responsibility. He's responsible for the entire thing. Even though offense isn't necessarily his jam, the fact that offense has been so bad since he's been there is problematic. And it doesn't look like, I think, if they go out and they go bring in Aaron Rodgers, like he's going to fix all of the problems, whether that's realistic or not. They probably told Woody that, right? Like, or said, like, hey, if we bring him in, look what we can do. Well, they're not doing it. So now I think it feels frustrating. Probably I could see how an owner would be frustrated about the direction.
So let's put a cap on the Aaron Rodgers, Woody Johnson proposed conversation. The cap is mostly, I don't bemoan that one bit, and I think it should happen. And I think my point is, I believe it happens a lot in the league where there are important conversations. I would say, in no way am I saying that Aaron was throwing darts. I would just say that it's Aaron's responsibility to be honest about that organization with the owner that put a lot into him. So that is important. So we'll leave that at that. The next point that you're talking about here, remember, you bring in a defensive coordinator by trade who is your head coach. You normally feel like you have that defense handled, right? We're going to talk about Jeff Ulbrich a little bit later here. Robert brings in Jeff Saleh. Yep. And so you have a defensive coordinator. We did it with Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn had a number of defensive coordinators in there that could take care of the regular day-to-day. But over top, the guy by trade who is a D coordinator, who's now the head coach, still is overseeing the defense in a certain way. He can put his final touches on how they run the defense. He knows when he crosses the proverbial line, the head coach who was a D coordinator, that he has a lot of work to do learning about the nuances of offense. He knows the nuances of offense as it pertains to defense, Lindsay. This is a very important point. But when they come in and cross the line and they are now perceived as being the omniscient, the all-powerful, all-knowing in everything in that organization, which, by the way, I would get on the top of any rock and say that's not the case, but for a very, very few, there is a transition time there. So then all of a sudden that defensive-minded head coach takes over the offense, tries to hire certain people, pushes a lot more buttons than he used to push, possibly through acquisition, possibly through ideas of play calling and scheme that used to screw him up as a defensive coordinator. And so there's a lot, everyone needs to know there's a lot of nuance there. It's not just, I'm coming in as a former D coordinator, I'm now the head coach, and I'm going to run roughshod over everyone. It's listening. It's trying to piecemeal things together. It's having a strong opinion about how you want to put together your offense, because you're going to go up and down with your offense as much as we love our defenses. This is a really important topic to bring up, not only here, but as we watch the season go on and more defensive coordinators who are at the helm, how they manage their offenses. It's another study that Eric Eager and I, who's no longer with us, in a good way, he's with the Carolina Panthers, that we used to talk about this a lot. There's a lot there, right, Lindsay, to talk about. So, whoever takes over, and right now we're projecting it's going to be Jeff Ulbrich, right? Former the D coordinator.
He's the interim.
Yeah.
So on an interim basis. Yeah. I also look at that. And so obviously the offense has been the problem. The defense has been the strength of the team. Now, if you move the defensive, and I am on board with not moving Hackett into this position. I mean, we're already, like I said, people were worried in the building that he was on the chopping block, and we don't know for sure that he's not still. So that remains to be seen. So obviously you don't elevate him to interim head coach. And so it makes sense to go with the defensive coordinator, I suppose, but I'm also a little bit worried, and tell me if I'm maybe shouldn't be, that this maybe waters down the strength of what is the strength of the team. Because if you take the guy who is just completely focused, like you're talking about Robert Saleh now having a bunch of different responsibilities that are not just focused on the defensive side of the ball. Now you've got the guy who was focused solely on the defensive side of the ball, and you're giving him a bunch of extra responsibilities. Go fix the offense, figure it out, empower different people. What are the answers? And now are we potentially hurting what is at this point the strength?
Jeff Ulbrich, hands down, is a categorical, balls to the wall, tough ass leader, right? Everyone loves this guy as a leader and as a person, as far as he is that guy that's going to run through the wall. He did as a player, as a linebacker in the league. He worked himself through a lot of different situations. He is a guy that people listen to, they respect, they trust. And I think what's going to happen is he's going to come in there. And I think what's going to be asked of him by management, Joe Douglas, Jaime Eli, the president, of course, the owner, they're going to say, we need you to be the natural leader that you are. We need your insight. We need your guidance. We need your leadership at a lot of levels. With that said, we need to make sure that our offensive people are still operating the way that they are. I don't see him making major changes at all, but for the fact of making final decisions on, hey, you're going to do this or that. He's going to have the final say on what play is called potentially after he does consult with, the offensive coordinator. He's going to keep running in his own way, the defense, I'm sure. At least that's how I would perceive it. But I really do believe they're going to be, relying on a guy to get him through these games and lead this organization that has some ups and downs as far as their head coaching leader, who just obviously checked out recently.
Game management is an issue that a lot of people who have not been head coaches before run into issues with. And so now this is someone standing on the sideline making judgment calls in game, bodies are flying and the red light is on and he's got to move quick. And it's ironic almost that Nathaniel Hackett's on that sideline because he struggled with those things in his first year. And I remember having a conversation with Sean Payton at the time about how being a head coach is just so different than being a coach. Like you can be a coordinator even, and just the decisions that you're asked to make in the moment, you don't have practice making these kinds of calls really quickly. And so I'm wondering how they handle that. Now, somebody who hasn't been in that position before. And again, not saying that they should have gone to Nathaniel Hackett, who we have evidence did not do well in that role, but at least has experience in that role and might be better the second time around. It'll be interesting to see how Ulbrich handles that situation or what the Jets might do behind the scenes to help set him up to succeed in that situation. Like the Broncos, again, going back to Hackett, and people made fun of them at the time for bringing in somebody to specifically help him in those situations. I think that might actually be something good that the Jets could do, have somebody in his ear in that way.
Well, remember, most of these guys, they have tapped into the proper data. And this is not necessarily segueing into SumerSports, but I am segueing into what we know is vitally important, and that's making sure that you're utilizing the data on your game decision making, et cetera, et cetera. And I guarantee every team in this league has a company or a number of third-party vendors that are working with them on this element. They have people in the booth who are working on it, people down in the bowels of the organization working on these levels and providing information to a guy like Jeff Ulbrich and to a guy like the coordinators and how they're going to move forward in all of this. Again, I think there is no way in the world that this ownership and management is going to expect Jeff Ulbrich to come in there and run the team. And I'm not speaking out of both sides of my mouth and call the plays in any way. I think they're saying, you make sure you oversee and make sure that things are staying in line. We learned some of that in Atlanta way back in that Super Bowl when things got a little bit out of hand. Dan Quinn was really focusing on defense and there were times when we weren't able to focus on the entire side of the field, right? I'm talking about offense and defense, and it becomes complicated. You can't spread yourself too thin, or you can't be the expert in the area that you are. All of a sudden, Jeff Ulbrich is down there calling all the defensive plays, and still he has other things to take care of moving forward. I mean, what are they, 2-3 right now? I think it's not like they're 0-5. So there's still an opportunity to grow. They need to sit down and really map this out to see what's best, given the personnel that they have and they're on their coaching staff. And they do have some adept coaches there and some smart coaches there. I continue to say this league, as you know, Lindsay, and I'll turn it back over to you, it is such a fine line between winning and losing. I know everyone gets sick and tired of hearing that, but between the coaches on a staff and other coaches, there's a lot of synchronicity there. And I just don't think it's out of the box where, there are teams that are losing who are horrible at what they do. They need some adjustment and they can get back in line. Before you know it, the Jets could be right back in line where they need to be. And maybe, the owner's decision on this was the right decision and the right time. These quarter decisions are big, not only for that, but they get an opportunity to see Jeff Ulbrich. Is he the heir apparent? And or do you have an opportunity to jump in and talk a lot more freely about your next wave of offensive coaching candidates, which jumping the game on that can be very beneficial.
Well, so there's a guy who doesn't have a job right now who's familiar with the AFC East. Do you like, is Woody Johnson, Joe Douglas, is there a chance that they place a call to Bill?
I could not answer that at all. I continue to say, generally speaking, there is not a head coach out there, former head coach, who could get you to the Super Bowl in the next 3 years quicker or have more of an opportunity to get you there than Bill Belichick. So I'm not answering your question.
No, you're not. This is fun.
I will say, all those people out there who are suggesting that Bill Belichick wasn't going to get back in and wasn't interested in getting back in early on or won't have an opportunity, unbelievable. I mean, he's going to, in my mind, he's going to have a really interesting opportunity to pick from a quiver presented to him, I think.
Well, This is not the conversation we were expecting to have, but I think you wouldn't like some of my opinions on that subject matter. So my concerns with Bill, and as we just throw this around, now we're Bill to the Jets. And by the way, who's calling him Bill? Like, what's happening here? Belichick. Yeah. Like, I'm like, you can call him Bill. I don't know who this girl thinks she is. Anyway, I think so. My concerns with Belichick at this point in a head coaching position is his style of coaching, which has clearly been proven to be successful over the years, but can clearly be a lot. And, he's not necessarily supportive. He's not an uplifting guy. He's like the opposite of like Kevin O'Connell over there on the sidelines during the Vikings game in London, coincidentally, saying like, as soon as somebody fumbles, like that doesn't, don't worry about that. We're going to get him right back out there where, that stuff happens. Like he's on the sideline immediately kind of going into like, I believe in you, like, and doing that type of a leadership approach, like being like, if these guys feel empowered, then there is a benefit that they will play their best without feeling like there's a hook ready to pull them off the field. Bill Belichick is the opposite of that. I think that there's a lot of pressure that comes with his style that isn't necessarily good for a young quarterback. Now, so I wouldn't put him with somebody after watching the way that Mac Jones was handled in New England, with a team that was going to draft a quarterback and develop him. And I don't think that that's a good pairing in my particular opinion. But this is interesting because this is not that. This is Aaron Rodgers, who is maybe the best fit in the league to put with a Bill Belichick, right? Like somebody who is competent, somebody who you don't have to be careful with. You're not trying to like his ego in the sense that it needs to be built up and that it might be fragile. Like that's not part of the factor here. So that might actually be an interesting pairing, I think. But could that happen immediately? Like, so just even forget next year, because maybe they'll make that call. But because he is available now, is that something that you could even see happening? And forget that you're talking about Bill Belichick. This isn't newsy. I'm literally just talking about taking somebody off the street as a head coach who's very experienced, plugging them in mid-season. Could that work?
I believe with the right coach, it could work. And I believe it's fairly anomalous. That said, I think the idea of doing something like that would take a lot of thought and a lot of discussion with that head coach you're talking about. And it can't, to your point, just be a couple-year guy. It can't be respectfully to a friend of yours and a guy that I like, Jeff Saturday. It can't necessarily be that, right? It has to be someone who is tried and true to the very depth of his soul, a football genius.
Yeah.
And I think that is a difference maker between someone like this. I don't know who else I would ever even consider if I were to be in that situation. There's a couple other guys I've mentioned that are on teams right now that are coaching that I would consider right now in the NFL. But it's not easy. It takes a lot of transition, of course. I think it can be done with the right person. That said, I also think the opportunity to be around someone in your building in this situation, in this case situation, I was combining both words, that I think you get a chance to see Jeff Ulbrich and you get a chance to see, are you looking for that type of a leader, sort of younger at heart, less old school, if you want to call it, less in your face. Jeff is in your face for sure, as in a certain way that is very different than some of the other coaches that have coached for 40 and plus years, of course.
Give me a comp. I know that you worked with him in Atlanta, so you're familiar with him personally. I think a lot of us are not. And so in terms of like the ways that you're describing him, I'm picturing Dan Campbell, and maybe it's just linebacker and fiery and some of the things that you've said that are painting this picture. Is that, and like if I were to pick up his personality and kind of comp it to somebody else and what they might look like as a leader?
I think there'd be a lot of people that would argue with me on this. And please, everyone understand this is big picture.
Okay.
I can compare him to the guy who, you're talking about Dan Campbell. You're talking about some of the former players out there who had a presence about them and an element about them that is different than the guys who, played college football and weren't right in the middle of the trenches during all of that. There's some almost fraternity about those kind of guys. I mean, you look at a guy right now, and I'm talking about, and I don't, we can talk about Tony Dungy was very different that way, right? When I think about some of these coaches that have played, wherever they have played, I look back on a guy who we don't even need to dig in. And I don't know if Stopsky can do this while we're talking. When I talk about Mike Tomlin, this is where I wanted to bring the parallel. I mean, I mean, Mike Tomlin, tough, gritty, in your face, look you in the eye, never back down, but also is thoughtful and empathic in his own way. I do believe that is Jeff Ulbrich. I believe that he is going to pull for his guys. He is going to get in their face and he is going to run roughshod over them in a certain way. Maybe that's the wrong phrase. He's going to press them and press them with a smile on his face most of the time, and an interesting smile, like, get your ass going here, not a smile like making it soft for these guys. And I think there are coaches out there that respond to players like that because they have the respect for that player who has been in the league and gotten their ass knocked around like they have. And I think there's a unique, again, fraternity to that group. Doesn't mean you can't be in a situation you haven't played and you're a genius at the sport and coaching. Far from it. It's just a different realm here when you're talking about former players. And I think it's important to make sure you look at who you have on your staff to make sure one of those guys can't bond with the players more than maybe something that has just happened in New York.
It's an interesting dynamic because the person that you need to bond with the most here is Aaron Rodgers. You need to kind of figure out a way to unlock this offense. And that's not all Aaron. I mean, obviously, Aaron, anybody who's watched a Jets game in the last few weeks knows that he just looks frustrated. He looks like, I've used the word joyless to describe watching him in the last few weeks out there. And they gotta figure something out there. And there have been people who, like Matt Harmon, who from Reception Perception and Yahoo, who I'm a big fan of because of the work that he does on wide receiver play, and charting each wide receiver and then talking about success rates versus man and zone and stuff like that. Like, he's really digging into the data. And what he's coming away with regards to the Jets is like their route concepts are stale, like they're static. There are things that are happening that are actually weirdly consistent with what Aaron Rodgers, we thought he was frustrated about Mike McCarthy in Green Bay, just like that, they don't have the answers to modern defenses. And we're seeing some of the same types of things there in New York this season. Somebody described it as a touchdown check down. Like that's what Aaron Rodgers' approach has seemed to be in the last few years when he's played. It's like it's either a check down or it's, a go route for a touchdown. And for some reason, the offense just isn't clicking here. And I don't know that that's all coaching. I don't know how much of it lands on the quarterback. I don't know how much of it lands on the personnel. I don't know. And that's actually an interesting, we do need to mention really quickly before we pivot to Davante Adams, which is a related topic, that a win this week for the Jets versus Buffalo would put them in first place in the AFC East. So it is still there in terms of the division feels winnable this year. And if you win the division, you can get to the postseason. And then if you just, catch fire at the right time, then it's all there for the taking.
It's a great point. This in no way, Jets fans, is catastrophic. Far from it. I know it's agitating and you're wondering, man, let's start thinking about the draft. Absolutely not. There are some really good football players on this team. They've put together a team that should be winning right now, and there's still a major opportunity to do so. To your point, all of a sudden they're in first place. Yeah. So I guess when you look back on this isn't something that, and it never is. It wasn't when Dan Quinn and I got fired in Atlanta. We knew going into that final year, just like this organization knows going into this year, there is a major hot seat available for whoever really wants to sit on the damn thing, because that's the way it is in the NFL. No one's feeling sorry for you. You've made a lot of money in these positions, and you just need to produce. And if you're not producing, your owner's going to look at you, who most of the time are businessmen at the core, and they're saying, we're not producing the way we need to make a change. I am not all about that. Believe me, I'm 100% behind management and coaches. I love that. I think what they do is admirable, but ultimately an owner, back to train set, they are going to make their decisions. And again, this is not a not thoughtful decision that just came about after a few cocktails going home from London, right? This is one that has been thought about, I'm sure, for Woody Johnson and co. for quite a while now. And it just was the right time.
Yeah. A few cocktails on the plane might have put him over the edge, though. Let's talk about whether or not this team is more or less to make a major move to go get Davante Adams now. Does this move impact that one?
Well, I think it has to. When you're a player and when you're a man, the agent that represents the player, you start thinking about, I want to go to an ideal team as well, right? I want to go to where there's a former quarterback that I played for. Maybe that's why we bumped out two places where we're talking about, the Jets, and we're talking about the Saints, from the Raiders to the Saints. Yes, I get that. But you also have to look at the situation there. If Davante Adams and his group look at the Jets and they're thinking, okay, we'd love to play for him. There's some other receivers there that, oh, by the way, or in other situation there with personnel that we like, this could be a really good situation. What's the stability there overall? Not only is Aaron Rodgers, I saw where Davante Adams said, is Aaron Rodgers truly going to be there? Or someone insinuated that he said that next year. Yeah. And now they don't have the same head coach there. What is going to happen there? What happens if I go there and I get a new head coach in there with a different perception of who I am as a almost 32-year-old on, I believe it is Christmas Eve, if I'm not mistaken. He's still a very talented receiver, by the way. Let me just sidebar here.
Yeah,
got a chance to watch. He does some really, really good stuff. He's a count-on guy. And you could argue, people are saying, oh, T, don't call him a number 2. He's not a number 2. Well, with some of these teams, he is a 1A or a 1B or whatever you want to call it, because he is now 32 years old almost.
Yeah.
He is really good. Don't get me wrong. There are other receivers out there that take the number 1 spot. You could argue with me with that right now about that, really.
Well, the Jets are a perfect example, because I think everybody looks at Garrett Wilson, says there's a 1, right? Like, I mean, but I would actually think, because of the interpersonal dynamics and just what I've seen on the field in terms of Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers not necessarily being on the same page, and reps I think that they will change that. I think Garrett is a very good wide receiver. So at the end of the season, assuming that Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, which isn't a given based on the O-line play, but secondarily, let's say he is. And then I think the two of them will be much better, and that Garrett Wilson has the ability to be very good. But if you put Davante Adams on that team, I think he actually still would be the 1, even with Garrett Wilson, because of the comfortability with Aaron Rodgers and just knowing where Aaron wants him to be.
So I call that complete semantics. So Lindsay, because if I'm the person in charge there,
who cares?
I'm telling this cat, you come in, you're going to be 1 and 1A, with Garrett Wilson, and that's the way it's going to be. And then we have a couple other guys that we love with Lazard, and we love where Williams is, and they're contributing. We have top-notch quarterback, because whatever we want to say, I mean, I still think Aaron Rodgers can do it. I completely do. I know you have some thoughts. You don't even know how to comment. There are thoughts out there that he's cynical and not happy. Why is he doing this right now? Again, I don't know where that came from necessarily. Maybe the reality is, if things are bumping here, I think that they can do some really good things there. Again, 1A and 1 is important. Don't call him a 2, and don't tell your receiver that's already situated there as your number 1 that you're bringing in a 1.
That's totally right.
Good.
You're right. That's a stupid conversation to have, because it is semantics in that situation. You just have 2 very, very, very good wide receivers, right? Like, everybody would want that. Nobody cares. That said, I am looking at the Jets and what I've seen from them so far, and the offensive pieces that they do have. And obviously there's some issues on the O-line. But you've got Aaron Rodgers, you have Garrett Wilson, you have Mike Williams. Also, I mean, can he stay healthy, be healthy? That's another conversation. But Mike is also long in the tooth, big wide receiver who is pretty productive when he is healthy. Then you've got Allen Lazard, who Aaron Rodgers is comfortable with. Prior to the Robert Saleh firing, when we were just looking at destinations for Davante Adams, I look at the Jets and I go, I don't know that a wide receiver away is their problem. I just don't necessarily look at this and say, you know what solves all their problems and now they're a good offense? It's Davante Adams. I don't know that it makes sense to me. And I know that Davante wants to play with a quarterback that he's comfortable with, but in both cases, it just doesn't necessarily make sense to me. I could see why the Jets would make the move, just because they have clearly, with Aaron Rodgers' contract, gone all in on now. And so you've already kind of sacrificed the future to a degree when you made the trade for Aaron Rodgers. So this better pay off. And Davante helps in that regard.
Yeah. And look, I think I look about I don't know, how many teams are we talking about? 5 or 6, about 5 or 6 teams we're talking about here. And I look at these teams and I think there are some pie in the skies, right? That there's no way they can pull it off financially. However, the Jets, I think it was 15 plus million. They have the space to be creative with this.
Yeah.
Some of these other teams that we think would be ideal fits, and we might talk about them, they are pushing right up against the bottom end of the cap space. And that becomes really, really complicated.
Yeah, just
and
at
it also becomes
17.
pressure laden. There's
Who
17.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Who would you say is an ideal fit? Like, if you were just picking a team?
Well, I mean, I think we mentioned it the other day. If not, maybe I'm mistaken here what show it
Are
was
you
on, but
confusing me with Kate Adams?
Oh,
Excuse me. No,
that's
that's
yeah.
fine. I'll be confused with her any day.
No, I understand. No, we were talking about, the Washington Commanders, right? So when we're talking about the Commanders and you talk about all the good things they're doing, right? And
Uh-huh.
as a team that's 4-1 right now, you would think we don't need to touch anything right now. It's exactly where it needs to be. But Dan Quinn's not that.
Yeah.
Dan Quinn's an edgy, great, upbeat guy, but he's always pushing the limits. He's always looking to improve. That was the one thing about Dan Quinn compared to other coaches at times that have been around. Dan wasn't the guy, just so everyone knows, we're speaking about Washington here, who would just sit back and go, okay, T, let's just keep our practice squad the way it was. Let's keep the back end of the roster the way it was. He has always, because he loves player personnel, by the way, he loves evaluating talent. He always, again, when appropriate and where appropriate, he always loves to say, okay, how do we improve this and take it a step beyond? You can sit there and look at Washington, Terry McLaurin, you think, yes, he does some really cool things. Cole Turner's been catching some balls on the tight end side. It's not like they're laden with a lot of top-notch receiving talent here. I'm not, there's some guys that are contributing.
De'Ami Brown, Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But what if goes to, okay, they have, if my calculations are right, they have 20-something $20 million space left. And could they get creative with this? If they believe Davante Adams was a guy that would continue to take this team over the top in its own way. I'm not saying the missing piece at all. I'm saying the momentum is going. It's not going to get easier as the season goes on. It's going to get more difficult. People are going to drill down even more on a quarterback that is a top-notch quarterback. How do you factor in another piece that keeps the momentum strong?
Okay, let's have that conversation, though. Let's say it's the Commanders, and we're now thinking about it from a Commander's point of view. Are you going to win the Super Bowl this year? Is that the push that you're making right now? Are you thinking that that's in the cards for you? And if not, do you not think that you could draft with a second-round pick next year somebody who is the next Davante Adams and get him at the front end of their career?
If you think Davante Adams has 2 or 3 more years, which is a whole other thing that you have to decide on, right? How many more years is it, and what is it worth on a second round? We drafted around Tony Gonzalez when we traded for Tony Gonzalez with the Falcons. He was a deuce, right? We had to pay a second round pick, and I remember calling Doug Hendrickson, who was his close confidant at the time, and I said, "This fucking guy, Tony Gonzalez, better stay here longer than 1 year." And Tony and I became great friends. We'd always talk at the front of the bus after games, and he did what we needed him to do, short of being around for a Super Bowl, of course, for us. But it's a precarious situation. I know he was a tight end. Where is Davante Adams right now? Does Davante Adams, if he were to come to in a situation like that or go to Washington and they traded away a deuce for him, right? Yeah. You have to have a feeling that he's going to be around for 3 more years to justify. That said, they are in a nice place. They would love to continue to build. There's a second round pick there for next year that they're excited about, but you never know how it works. If they're thinking right now, and I'm sure Adam Peters is doing his research on something like this, he may have already cashed out and said, absolutely, we will not do this. Mm-hmm. But it is worth the while of a general manager who is adept as Adam Peters is in his young years in this role to say, let me play this out. Let me look at the data here. Back to data, because I think it's important.
Absolutely.
Let's see where we are, and let's try to make a decision that isn't just on the ability of watching this player. Think about this very quickly. You can put the vids on and watch and analyze as a personnel man, Adam Peters, myself, Dan Quinn as a coach, and say, this guy can still do it. He can do it for another 2 or 3 years. You can do that, whatever that is. Yeah. But in the end, you need to look at all the other data that is presented to you, the financial data, the other data on injuries, et cetera, and make a sound decision about, is it worth a second round pick right now?
Yep.
And is it worth the money? Also, are you bringing this cat in and saying, we'll just wait to the end of the season? This is what you brought up as well. Do you truly need to secure a deal going into the next 3 years, rip up the deal that you have right now? Those are big numbers. $36.25 million over the next 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Each year.
That's what his cap hit is next year. It's 36 million plus 36 and a quarter. And then that's his cap hit for the year after that also. So you're looking at those numbers and you're saying, and that's non-guaranteed money, that technically if you make a trade for him right now, you own the rights to Davante Adams for 3 years, but you don't want him to play on that contract for you next year. You don't want a $36 million cap hit for a 32-year-old wide receiver. So 13.5 as the cap value if you traded for him today. That's now we can do that, but do you think that a trade would be contingent on renegotiating a new contract?
No question I do. I also think it's right now contingent on most of these teams. Now I know, Washington's in a little bit of a different situation. The other teams we're talking about that are right up against it, the only way they'll be able to do that is if the Raiders literally, ripped off half of that contract. Let's just put it, make it a 50%. I don't know what they would do. There had to be money coming off of that contract for these teams to take on a guy like Davante Adams. Otherwise, I don't know how they can do it.
What would motivate them to do that?
The Raiders?
Because he marched into their office and said, "Hi, I'm your number one wide receiver, and I'm your best offensive player, and I would like to be somewhere else." And they're like, "Okie doke, sure." Oh, you want us to pay for him too? For you to take him? Sure. Like, why? Why would they do that?
Let's talk first of all about Tom Telesco. Moves over year one from being with the Chargers for a number of years, takes over the franchise there in Las Vegas, right? There's a lot going on there. They're trying to settle everything. They have a head coach who's still, obviously played in the league, but feeling his way through how everything's going on.
For sure.
They have some uncertainty there in the building, just the way it is, right? It's just the way it is. And so with that, here they are now faced with a situation with one of their star players coming in saying, "I want gone." That's never easy. When that starts, whipping through your building, it affects morale in a lot of different ways. And players can comment on how it affects them. Coaches can, management can, owner can. No one wants to talk about that. There is a competitive side that's like, go screw yourself then. Leave. If you don't want to be here, leave. That's the initial competitive side, right? You don't want to be here? Screw it. Go ahead. That's not that easy to say that, right? Because the reality is all of a sudden you have money tied up. There's a lot of elements there that you're trying to work through. And if all of a sudden it's so far gone right now and it's so far involved, there's so many people talking about it, to just wrap that up in a bow and say, sorry, we're not doing this now. Davante, come back in. Let's go out and have a dinner and let's clean this all up. We love you. We never even wanted you to leave anyway. Oh, I never wanted to leave anyway. High five and drinking a couple, Hennessy and we're done for the night. And that's not going to be the case. It is too far beyond right now to wrap that back up and clean it up, at least in my opinion. Tom Telesco might disagree with me. It's really complicated. I know they've made statements right now. We'll just take more time. You don't have a whole bunch of more time up to the trade deadline, but you also don't have more time on how it's going to affect, the organization, the team, et cetera.
And as Ian Rappaport pointed out earlier this week, if he's on the Raiders roster on Wednesday, they have to pay him his game check for this week, which is $1 million. And if he's not playing for them, so that's, I think, where the 48 hours number came in. And we heard a lot of people reporting yesterday that a trade for Davante Adams is likely to happen like sooner rather than later, next 48 hours. I think it's probably with that in mind, that they want to move him if they're going to move him, get him off the books so that $1 million doesn't come out of their pocketbook. Right? Do you think that that's probably the impetus behind that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess keeping it in perspective, $1 million is $1 million, right?
Look at you.
I don't want to be. No, that's horrible to say it that way.
From a team perspective,
years ago, yes, it was a big deal, and it still is. And Scott Pioli, close friend of mine, would always argue with me, "You're just cashing out in these $500,000 deals, and we could put 7 of those together and get X person." I'm like, I get it, Scott. But we also have other conversations here that we need to take care of, because I am a big believer in morale and making sure things are operational. And if it's not, and we're holding back and we need to potentially sign someone for a little bit extra here and there, or we need to take something out of this situation like we're talking about to mollify the situation, then so be it.
So from a historical context, right, of like if you're looking at like Raiders that are not Raiders, receivers who are roughly, his age, maybe like if you're looking for comps about what they can expect in return, what the trade value is likely to be, then Stephon Diggs is probably an interesting comp because he is also older, established. We know who he is as a wide receiver. They traded him, interestingly, for a 2, but they had to throw in a couple late round picks. So it was Steph plus, I don't remember if was it a 5 and a 6, but it's like a Steph and a
It's 5
couple
and
of late
6.
round picks for a 2. Is that what we might be looking at here from a Raiders standpoint? That they might actually have to give up something in order to get that 2 back?
Yeah, I think that's all about creativity. Remember, there are ways to approach this. We're proud, by the way, a little aside here. Here's my dig or my pitch, excuse me, not
Your
dig. It
dig.
wouldn't be a dig. Not, well, kind of a dig only because I think there are possibilities to take a trade comparative tool and really run all the data in that tool to decide what truly do we need to do. And by the way, it's not that easy. People sometimes think a GM just gets on the phone and he's like, "What do you want from him? I want a 2. I want a 5 and a 6, and he wants to go back, et cetera, et cetera. And you need to do this, this, and this." That's not the way it is. We have, as general manager, former general manager, so much on our mind, and the bandwidth is stretched so thin on so many names and so many trades over the years that you do need a resource to jump into to say, okay, let me look at these 5 comparatives that are brought up, and let me decide what I think is the best for our organization and what might be the best, for the other organization we're dealing with here. And again, I just want to say, from a SumerSports standpoint, we do have that tool that we're really excited about because we do believe that the trade that you're referencing here, which was a 2 and a 5 and a 6 in subsequent years, rolls into something like this, and it gives you an opportunity to really dig in and talk about, here's this trade that we're talking about. Here's 4 others that you might want to look at. I, however, with this organization, am leaning towards this, Stephon Diggs trade. And so I think the more that you can dig into the data out there that can compare, I don't know if you find there's a comparison there. I think the better it is for intelligent conversation. So you're not just winging it, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to be here anymore. With negotiations where they're opposite ends of the spectrum, and they're spending time to get up to this spot where all of a sudden it takes days and days and weeks to get up here. Like, let's get into the ballpark. I'm a big believer in that. And luckily, one of my good friends in the agency business, Ben Dogger, was a good friend of that. Now, our numbers were huge always, but we didn't mess around out here, eons away. And I think that's important during a trade deadline time. Let's not waste everyone's time. Let's really come to an agreement on where the potential range is going to be.
You keep saying trade deadline. Do you think that we're actually that's not for a while?
It's not for a while. I know everyone's saying this is going to happen now. I'm just saying with the trade deadline looming, my God, I'm tongue twisted today. Excuse me. Looming, I think it's always in the back of your mind. Like, what happens if you have a what if side to you, and a lot of us do, as general managers and former team builders, you think, gosh, what would happen if we were right up against this? The Raiders are thinking about that. And there are other teams out there that are thinking, gosh, I really want to acquire this guy. But if we prolong this too long, are they really going to say, well, there's now more people in the mix? Let's just say the Jets are right here where they are right now. The closer it gets to a trade deadline, the more apt that the Raiders are going to say, all right, we might have to put more money back into this or take money out of this deal, take whatever percentage that is. We're going to have to be more creative because all of a sudden, maybe the Jets decide I'm pulling out, if it were to be the Jets, hypothetically, because they have a lot of money. And maybe Washington said, we're not into this. Let's move on. Now, all of a sudden, there are 3 teams that are interested that don't have any money. Now what happens? Now it becomes a pressure-laden deal, with the Raiders to decide how they're going to get creative with it. And that's where I think the looming trade deadline is on their mind.
We've talked about his age a few times. So he's 31. You mentioned he turns 32 later this year. He is 6'1", 215. Just in terms of comps, looking at like people around the league, these are, important measurables to take into account because not every wide receiver is the same type of wide receiver. And so we want to look at people that are roughly the same size, roughly the same age. And because one of the questions that we have to answer here, as you've brought up several times, is how long is he going to be Davante Adams? You think that he is still at or near the top of his game, that he can still play? You've said that you turned on the tape. and you liked what you saw. But at 31, we're looking at wide receiver cliff territory, right? Like, so how much longer is this likely to continue? So here's some names of the people in the league right now who are roughly his age, roughly his size. And just to get an idea of what these people look like and what might be to come for him. D-Hop, I think, is on the back end of his career, right? Like, he had a really good game. Was it 2 weeks ago? Anyway, but D-Hop, Diggs is 2 years younger, interestingly. And I think that we've already started to see, I hate to use the word decline. I can't think of a different word, but like, I don't know that he's a guy who can get downfield as fast as he used to, and maybe is being used differently as a result in Houston. Maybe a little bit more like the short intermediate guy, kind of like we saw Keenan Allen already transitioned to in Los Angeles for similar reasons. And he's also on this list. 1 inch taller, same age. Amari is 2 years younger. Kupp is 1 year younger, 1 inch taller. Mike Williams is 2 years younger, 1 inch taller. Thielen, 2 years older, same height. OBJ, 1 year younger, 2 inches shorter. Robert Woods, 2 inches taller, same age. Michael Thomas, 31 years old, same age, 1 inch taller. So these are kind of like the comps here. And I think what I hear when I hear that list of names, and some of them are still very, very good wide receivers, but already starting to kind of physically break down. We're dealing with more injuries more frequently in the case of Kupp, certainly in the case of Mike Williams. I mean, it's an interesting list, I think, for a number of different reasons, because I would argue that he might be the only one on the list in this age and size group that hasn't really shown an obvious decline that we can kind of point to.
I think there are teams out there that mull it over a lot longer than others, right? Some would suggest, wow, this guy can still help us. He is a 1A, whatever we call him, and he can help us if he gets injured. And let's project on, there are data projections out there on injuries, right? He is going to miss X amount of games in a season over the next 2 or 3 seasons if we signed him. Are we okay with that? Do we have the right building blocks? And that's all about when you build a team, to make sure that you surround someone like this that has some age on him, given the probability of there being an injury here and there. You don't want to bring a guy like this in and all of a sudden, you're going bare cupboard and you're just winging it, holding yourself, hoping that things work out well. It can't be that way. We thought the same thing with Tony Gonzalez, even though he was a little bit older when he came in. He took care of his body really well. And I know it's a different position, but we wanted to always make sure that we had the person waiting in the wings to fulfill for a game 2 or 3, which is important in this situation. So I think teams need to be mindful, if they're bringing him in, about that, because that is a concern. And like you said, the inevitable breakdown at the receiver position is known. I mean, it's very rare. I don't know who the oldest, most productive receiver has been out there.
Jerry Rice.
Probably Jerry. What about Fitz? Where was he with everything? I don't know where he was with it. I mean, there are some good receivers out there that can still, can catch the ball and run the ball and get big time plays for you. And we know that he can do that. This guy, when you watch him still, his concentration on the ball, his ability, he's not running the routes with the same amount of explosiveness like he did. And he doesn't have to sometimes. There's something about him, but he has such awareness on the field, concentration, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he's still a very valuable asset. This comes down to, and I'm sure all of the pundits out there and all of the critics on maybe what we're saying, even suggesting that this is an important move, I don't think they're denying that. But I think they would be saying, well, this is ridiculous. If you can't get this contract lopped off to 50% by the Raiders, and you can't figure out the second round situation, and you can't figure out the next contract, it's a moot point. Why are you guys even spending so much time talking about it? Okay, grant that. I believe that is very, very important. That said, there's an opportunity to gain a very good, still productive receiver out there for the teams that could benefit. And they don't all have to be at the bottom of the heap. They can be the Washington Commanders at 4-1. Am I coming back to them again? My God. Maybe
You are. You want. I'm getting a vibe from you. My vibe is different, and I don't know. And I want to ask you about this because my favorite team for him, taking all the things that we're hearing in the news off the table and literally just looking at where would I want him to go? Where do I think it makes the most sense for the team? And I keep coming back to the guy that he actually posted a picture of, Edgar Allan Poe. I like the Ravens for him. I like the Ravens for him for a number of different reasons, because I think it gives them something that they don't currently have, which is a true alpha one outside guy. They've got Zay in the slot. Love that. And then it kind of bumps Bateman down to like a 3, like he's in a more support. I like that wide receiver room a lot better if he is in it. Now, obviously, it's a low volume passing offense, right? But just putting him out there, I mean, how does that open things up for the run game and what they want to do in that space of the field? And or if they come down to stop Derrick Henry, then now you've got Davante Adams. I think that because of what we're talking about with regards to his age, I think it needs to be a team that assesses themselves and assesses the landscape and goes, this is our year. And is it worth it to pull him in now, even if he doesn't play next year or the year down the road, which feels very un-Ravens-like. They've been very disciplined about their team building, but I feel like to give up an asset now in a year where the Chiefs are undefeated, admittedly, but look about as beatable as they've looked in several years. And you look at the Bills, and what we saw this past week was a disaster. You know, they need some help. I would look at the AFC if I was the Ravens. I would go, this is the year. Pedal to the metal, all chips in, go for it.
I want to interject, and I get it. You have a little bit of fantasia to you, and I appreciate.
What are you talking about?
The reality
explain to me why that's fantasy driven.
I love what you've said here. I probably like that receiver group, and I think they are a good receiver group, and they fit in with how they approach things. So you're talking about an organization that has no money to spend. They're like second highest spender right now. And then they're in a situation with a quarterback in an offense that is not a high flying, productive throwing offense.
Right.
So that's all I'm saying. Fantasia. It's going to come back.
That's why it's not fantasy. It's actually bad for him in fantasy and everyone else.
Well, I'm talking fantasia, not fantasy. Two different things.
Okay. What is fantasia?
Just kind of like,
like,
what do you call it?
Like La La World?
La La,
okay.
What do you call it? Rainbows and unicorn things. That's what that kind of was imagined it being over your head.
Ended. Okay.
Only you shouldn't be, because it's going to come back and you guys are going to run something, a picture of me when Baltimore does bring him in, and I'm going to be like little thing. All I'm saying there is I like the idea. Believe me, I step back though and I put myself in their shoes, and I'm thinking, wow, this is not as easy. Yes, we'd love to have him on. Most people would. But given the fact that our offense is designed the way it is, given the fact that we don't have any real money to deal with, how are we going to pull this off? So that's why I say that. Not fantasia in any way questioning your legitimacy in comments.
But your offense is built a certain way, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't help your offense. Like, he's not a priority for your offense. Your offense is not built around, getting Davante Adams 20 targets a game, which might be why they're not on his list. And I'm trying to plug him in from a them perspective, not a him perspective. I don't necessarily love it for him, except for he could win a Super Bowl and he's 31. And he goes to a team that's going to be in every single game for the rest of the year. And I think that he's been really frustrated. And he's got a quarterback who can get him the ball. Albeit infrequently, he will get him the ball. And I just think that the combination, I like it. And I'm sad that you don't like it. I think it makes so much sense, Thomas.
I like it. But when you're a guy, and I've heard only good things about him, and you may know more because you're all the way out there on the left coast and you got it figured out there.
We all know each other on the left coast. Yeah.
But I was thinking, like, okay, I love all that you've said. Let's go back and dig into the psyche of a football player who is wanting to get out of a situation that. How many catches does he have right now? 16 prior to his injury.
But that's because they can't get it to him.
Yeah.
Like, how many of those are catchable balls?
What if he goes, to Baltimore, and he just, gets a smattering of balls. He's got 2, 3, or 4 in a game, maybe 2, 1 game, maybe 4, maybe a big game here and there. Is that really what you want to finish off your next wave? I've been around receivers who want a strong finish in their careers. They don't just want to tail out. And I think the idea that he wants to go to a quarterback that knows him, and that he played with knows that he's going to be getting the damn ball his way a lot, and there are going to be go-to elements to it. And that's my biggest concern. How do you move a guy like that out of there, bring him in, and all of a sudden there's a wah moment? Not saying it would wah with Baltimore at all. Love the organization. Love what Eric DeCosta is doing. I just, until you have me pitched up there with unicorns and rainbows flying around my head in the next few weeks, then I'm just going to hold off on it.
I guess. I mean, and by the way, Jay Glazer yesterday went on a show and he just dismissed it out of hand. He goes, he's not going to Baltimore. And I was like, I need more. I need to understand why, other than the money, when we're looking at, so yes, they don't have money. They have $4.3 million worth of cap space. Oh, well, guess who we want to put it? The Saints. The Saints are the most aggressive team. They're coming after him. This is the only team anyone can talk about that's not the Jets. They have 2.6. Like,
did Jay Glazer say that? Did Jay Glazer say that? He didn't say the Saints, did he?
No, everyone is saying the Saints.
But I'm just wondering if Jay did, because we all know that Jay's got a soft spot for the Saints over the years. Of course, Sean's not there anymore, but he's got a soft spot for the organization. I say that respectfully, meaning, it's just, all I'm saying is it has to be a creative spot. And this comes back to this. Maybe if this gets closer in the next couple of weeks, it doesn't, let's say they can't finalize this. Maybe your team, the Baltimore Ravens, will come back into the situation here.
Come on, DeCosta, you can do it. You can do it. This is the Super Bowl difference. I'm telling you.
Okay.
Listen to me.
3-2. They are 3-2 right now. Let's see where they go. Maybe there's impetus, but I want you to tell me accounting wise, maybe on another call, how we're going to pull it up.
I can't, but we're all fine with him going to the Saints, who have less money and always have less money, and somehow manage to still field a team with less money every single time.
Olave and Shaheed, that would be amazing combo.
Yes.
Yeah,
but they're no still money. Are they going to win it? Are they going to win it? Are they built? Do they even think that that's what they're built to do? I don't know. They could win their division.
Let me ask you this. And how would it be for this type of a receiver, going to be 32 on Christmas Eve? Again, I hope I read that right. He comes into an organization that is popping right now with an awesome head coach, awesome morale, and a young quarterback who's taken the world by storm. Would you not want to be a part of that if you were a receiver? Just the energy of the Washington Commanders, and you jump out to the other coast and you say, man, this quarterback is something special that I would love to be a part of helping him grow over the next 2 or 3 years.
I feel like you and I are now it's a debate. And we are each at opposing lecterns, and we're just going to go back and forth about the Commanders and the Ravens and why they should be the teams that we're talking about here. By the way, Matt Stopsky, who you name check regularly on this show, and I think that sometimes people are like, who the is Stopsky? He's our producer, and he's been putting a lot of really good stats in the chat here to support our conversation. He says that Lamar Jackson has the 8th most passing attempts between 10 and 19 air yards this season.
Whoa. Okay.
Oh, look who's our debate. Our debate is now.
You're one up on me right now. We'll just,
I win. Let's just say I win.
I just want to see Jaden Daniels continue to have people that he can throw to. And as they start clamping down in those defensive coordinator rooms, trying to figure out this young buck, that, they can continue to roll there. But we'll move on. We don't need to beat that to death. Of course, there are some interesting teams that we're talking about here, right? How it plays out, the management, everyone's probably in their mind thinking about everything we said. And there's a lot on their mind. It's not just a contract. It's about next contract. It's about how it's going to affect morale. We're kind of summarizing all of this. And, what do they have the right quarterback? And will he be happy going to that team?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be important as well.
Well, obviously, since his unhappiness is the reason we're having this conversation anyway. All right. So obviously it's fun talking about trade possibilities here, and we'll see if we're right about any of this in maybe the next 48 hours, 24. Now the clock is ticking. Worth mentioning here, by the way, if you are new to the SumerSports show, not a subscriber of ours, that we have had several interesting conversations over the course of the last few weeks that I just want to pat ourselves on the back for just a second, because on September 27th, that episode, we talked about scoring, because remember at that point in time, people were freaking out about scoring being down. Well, through 5 games now, guess what we're looking at? Scoring's up. Scoring's up, Thomas. How about that? We now have, actually, I don't have last night's game factored into this, but prior to Monday Night Football, the scoring average per game this year is 22.1 points, which is up from last year's 21.8. And the year before that, it was 21.9. So it's a very different number than the 21.2 number that we were looking at after week 3. And we suggested that that was likely to happen. Also talked about Deshaun Watson a few weeks ago. And we don't need to have that conversation now, because our September 12th episode, I think we presented all the data in the world that there was to suggest why they should move on from him. And all that's happened since then is we've received even more evidence that that is the move here, but they don't appear ready to make that move.
So here we are as the world turns in the National Football League, and it's going to be turning faster and faster, as you can imagine. And I would sit there and think about all the teams that are on the top. Can we just, since we're just talking a little bit about news to cap off here,
please,
you have to give the local Atlanta team some legit kudos here, and Kirk Cousins. I mean, I'm gonna make this categorical statement right now. Okay. In many years of being in the National Football League, the teams who have continued to go far, deep, and I'm not suggesting Super Bowl at all. I am, just because I can't, but I am saying when balls bounce in the direction, literally and figuratively, towards the team who continues to recover the ball that gets bounced up in the air should be picked off and taken for a pick six, isn't. The ball that rolls on the ground goes out of bounds before the opponent gets it. All of the great things that are working on Kirk Cousins' side, not to mention his ability to move the ball down the field lately, good fortune is going their way right now. And I think it's a real strong suit for that organization. What that does, Lindsay, and I'll take it away from Atlanta, but I'll use Atlanta as an example. It builds the momentum, and you're like, man, we can do anything here. There's nothing worse than when you're a good football team or a growing football team, and every time you turn around, there's a bad penalty, there's a field goal that goes awry, or a field goal that is made because it bumps in, and fate seems like it's against you. Yeah. It brings you down. This team right now is believing that they belong on the top of the division and they belong to stay there. I just find it fascinating. Keep an eye on that, because things are rolling and momentum is going their way. And I think, Kirk's such a good guy. I think there's good energy and good mojo on his side that I think people are praying for him to win. That's for sure.
It does feel like it's moving in the right direction there, right? Which is what you want to see. You want to see growth. And I think on a week-to-week basis, we've seen growth. Now, can we see more downfield runs for Bijan Robinson? That's my next request, because you actually brought it to my attention. All of this like running laterally only to gain a yard, and he's covered so much ground. I pulled up his chart on Next Gen. I'll have to send it to you. It's gonna drive you bonkers. There's so much ground covered this way.
Well, look, you can see what they're doing. Even what they did this last game, they shut his butt down in certain ways. Algier runs his butt off too. Like, those are two hard running backs. I love it. And I think Bijan, no question, is one of the very best in the league. I think getting creative with him, if you have to toss him the ball more here and there, because he's going to rip, all of a sudden he rips off 12 and 15 yards. I love that. And I've said this to you before. I mean, this is not about prolonging a running back's career, right? And Raheem Morris is too smart to do that. He's not thinking about, I need to hold this guy and save his legs over the years. This guy is going to get them in a lot of great situations. There are going to be games where these defensive coordinators are moving forward and they are just stopping him right at the point. But there's going to be a lot of other plays where he breaks it open and can be very special on it. This was not meant to be an Atlanta Falcon podcast. I am just saying, you can go in as a former GM sometimes and you can be a little edgy and a little bit cynical, not about the people there, just in big picture. And I'm impressed with the momentum here. And I think it needs to be called out in a positive way for, AMB, Arthur Blank, and company there, because, those guys have a really cool energy moving forward right now.
I got to tell you, I'm not impressed with myself today, because I didn't even realize that there was a comment section now that we're doing this show live, and there is. And Nino, I think that the Bills would be a great fit for him personally. They're in the same category as a team that doesn't have any money, but I mean, again, you've already heard my thoughts about that. I like the Bills. They're my number 2 team. I had to pick one to make a really strong debate stance for, and that was the Ravens, but I also like the Bills for him personally. And I will address the comment section next time we go live more frequently as we're having this conversation, because I want to hear what you guys are thinking in regards to the points that we're making. For now, though, thank you so much for joining us today. That's going to do it for the SumerSports Show. See you again next week. If you're not a subscriber, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thomas and Lindsay, peace out.
Peace.